Hello, everybody. It's me again, and today we're going to be talking about the so-called confirmation bias. So, what is confirmation bias? How do we define confirmation bias? Confirmation bias is basically just a mental habit of, I would argue, a lot of people. Okay? And confirmation bias basically just says that there is a tendency for a lot of us to sort of seek or find information that relates that coincides with our beliefs. And I'll give you an example of that. Okay? Suppose you were debating about the death penalty. And suppose before you attended that debate, you have actually experienced a traumatic event that you, you may have, let's say for example, you met a serial killer, and that serial killer they almost caught you. Now, after you escape from that serial killer, from any means that you could think of, any means possible, any way possible, okay? You sort of think to yourself that that serial killer should die, or should pass away, or should be punished, okay? Should be punished to the point that any means should be punished to the point that any means necessary. And to that extent, you want to believe on the death penalty, and then you argue for the death penalty. Now, confirmation bias would say, okay, confirmation bias could have a massive impact on the things that you say, or on the things that you think about this topic, or this particular topic, because you have a belief in yourself that people like the serial killer that you just met or have met, okay, like people like them should have extreme punishment, that they should have the most extreme punishment imaginable. So then you already hold this belief, okay? You already hold this belief for the death penalty when you're arguing about it. So you tend to find information that coincides and agrees with that belief, instead of looking for anything contrary to your belief. Okay? So you would tend to be more biased. You would tend to be more selective on the things that you search up, on the things that you research, the things that you study about this topic, because you already have a preconceived notion. Okay? You already have a preconceived notion based upon your own, okay? Based upon your own beliefs, regardless of how biased it actually is. Okay? So that is confirmation bias in a nutshell. What are the types of confirmation bias? Let's first start with first type. First type being bias for searching information. Okay, you're biased whenever you're searching information. And the thing about this is actually very self-explanatory. Having confirmation bias just says that you have the tendency to seek and find information that coincides with your belief. Okay? So whatever you believe you may have, or whatever belief you're arguing for, you tend to search for information. You tend to find or seek information that already coincides or agrees with your belief regarding of the regardless of the objective reality of the situation. And that could really narrow your thinking, narrow your logical thinking when it comes to making decisions and planning or whatever that you may need to accomplish if you're constantly being sort of one-sided with the information that you search. And with the surge of AI, that's practically what's happening, okay? So AI, okay, artificial intelligence, is basically made to agree with you, okay? But that's sort of an oversimplification. But generally, artificial intelligence models are designed to adapt to your own are designed to adapt to the current user of that AI. So naturally, when you're searching for things or information from ChatGPT or Gemini, Claude, or whatever AI you're using, the AI will actually sort of tweak the answer. Okay, it will sort of tweak the answer slightly based on your questions. Okay, but I think Gemini is much more neutral when it comes to that. But ChatGPT can actually really make you biased. Okay, it can be really biased according to whatever viewpoint that you may have, and that can really exacerbate and that could really sort of increase the existing bias that you have, the confirmation bias. Okay, that can really narrow down your logical thinking. And the second type of confirmation bias, okay, the second type of confirmation bias is what we call bias bias for information. Okay, the second type of confirmation bias is bias for interpretation of information. So what this just basically says is that you tend to filter out anything that doesn't agree with your own beliefs, your own values, or whatever opinion that you may hold of anything, either about yourself or anything that sort of warrants your opinion. Okay, that sort of warrants your opinion about anything. Okay, sort of warrants your opinion, and for you to weigh your opinion on that topic. Okay, so you tend to filter the information based on the things that you agree with. Okay, you tend to sort of manipulate that. That is the whole premise of the bias for interpretation of information. you sort of manipulate the information that is given to you and make it an objective fact, while the information that was actually given to you is actually completely different. Okay, completely different from your own interpretation. You tend to interpret it in your own lens, because, and there's a good reason for this, because humans, okay, we are actually built to sort of follow our intuitions, and that has provided us benefit of being able to react quickly. Okay, the answer, our ancestors were able to react quickly because they were able to filter the information of the environment from their own viewpoint and from their own lens. Okay, so that is why we have an inherent bias for interpreting information and excluding the things that may be contrary or may disagree with whatever we believe. And there is a good study for that supports this. Okay, so we can just pull it out here. Okay, so this is the source. Okay, the study is named Biased Assimilation and Attitude Polarization: The Effects of Prior Theories and Subsequently Considered Evidence. Okay, so this was published in 1979 by researchers Charles G. Lord, Lee Ross, and Mark R. Lepper. So if you could see her, I could just I can just show it here. Okay, and I actually really like this quote. It says here, "Smart people believe weird things because they're skilled at defending beliefs they arrived at for non-smart reasons." I actually like that quote. So here we are. Here's the article that I'm mentioning that is supporting the bias for interpretation of information. It says here, a team at Stanford University conducted an experiment involving participants who felt strongly about capital punishment. Okay, so they're talking about death penalty, with half in favor and half against it. Each participant read descriptions of two studies: a comparison of two states with and without the death penalty, and a comparison of murder rates in a state before and after the introduction of the death penalty. After reading a quick description of each study, the participants were asked whether their opinions had changed. Then they read a more detailed account of each study's procedure and had to rate whether the research was well conducted and convincing. So they basically were given these sort of statistics. Okay, and these statistics were, I believe, entirely fake. Okay, there are two groups: one who is in favor of the capital punishment, okay, or death penalty. The second is the one who is against it. Okay, so they already have preconceived notions about the capital punishment. Okay, then they were given studies. Okay, that they were given sort of these statistics on the murder rates before and after death penalty, and comparison of U.S. states with and without the death penalty. Then there in fact the studies were fictional. That's what I said. Okay, so the statistics that the two groups were given, it was actually fake. It was absolutely fake. So half the participants were told that one kind of study supported the deterrent effect and the other undermined it, while for other participants the conclusions were swapped. The participants, whether supporters or opponents, reported shifting their attitude slightly in the direction of the first study they read. Okay? Now, once they read the more detailed descriptions of the two studies, they almost all returned to the original belief regardless of the evidence provided, pointing to details that supported their viewpoint and disregarding anything contrary. So that is confirmation bias in action. So if we can summarize what we just read, okay, what we just read in that study, you basically had two groups. Okay, number one, the people who were for death penalty. Number two, people who are against death penalty. They were given these sort of statistics on the U.S. murder rates. Okay, the U.S. murder rates with and without death penalty. Okay, and when the groups read the first study that they were given. Okay, and mind you, these studies were absolutely fictional. They were fake. They were just basically just forged for this specific experiment. And when the first group read, okay, when the groups read the first, actually the first article, first statistic that was given to them by the experimenters, they basically sort of shifted their viewpoint. Okay, they sort of slightly shifted their viewpoint, but then on the second time that they read the second article, okay, the second statistic that they were given, once those groups either for or against the death penalty read the second article, second statistic, they basically reverted back to their original belief, okay, that they either that they supported death penalty or are against death penalty. So what tells what so what basically happened there is that they found the detailed study. Okay, the second study was more detailed than the first one, and then the second study, okay, had sort of like more information for them to pick through. Okay, for them to pick through and sort of filter out for their own beliefs. Okay, that's why the groups that were chosen for this experiment reverted back to their original beliefs because they had more information to pick, to sort of cherry pick and then interpret that information in their own biased viewpoints, their own biased lens of how they see death penalty. Okay, so that is the second type of bias for interpretation of information. And then we have the last type of confirmation bias. That is the second type. So we have the last type. Okay. We have the last type, which is okay. So last type of confirmation bias is the bias for recalling information. So what this basically just says, okay, one thing you have to know about this type of confirmation bias is that people, okay, some people, and more generally a lot of people, tend to recall or remember information based on how they saw that information, okay? Or based on how they felt about that certain piece of information. So let me explain, let me elaborate that. You have the second type of bias, second type of confirmation bias, which is the bias for interpreting information, okay? So now the bias for recalling information basically just has the ground of how you interpreted that information and how you interpreted that information regardless of the information, the interpretation that you have is false. You tend to recall your own information because your interpretation you view as correct. You would, even if it isn't correct. Okay, so there is a study for this. So the study that sort of confirmed this type of confirmation bias. There was a study. So basically, you had groups again. The first group, okay. So the premise of the study, they basically had sort of this woman, okay. We had two groups again, and this woman, the woman that the experimenters informed the two groups on, that woman was that woman, okay, they asked if that woman was introverted or extroverted. Okay, they asked if the experimenters asked the groups that were involved in the experiment if they thought that the woman that they cited was more of an introvert or an extrovert, or more of a librarian or a real estate agent. Okay. So that dichotomy, okay, the people, the groups that who were asked in order to sort of label the woman that they cited had to choose, okay, had to sort of think, sort of give out their own opinions on whether the woman was introverted, extroverted, and that's basically just the whole premise of it. If you can read here, okay, there's actually here. In one study, participants read a profile of a woman which described a mix of introverted and extroverted behaviors. The leader had to recall examples of her introversion and extroversion. One group was told this was to assess the woman for a job as a librarian, while the second group were told it was for a job in real estate sales. Okay? So there's a sort of dichotomy here. The one group was told that the woman was supposed to have a job for a librarian, as being a librarian. The second was for real estate. Okay, there was a significant difference between the two. What these two groups are called. But the librarian group would call them more examples of introversion, and the sales group would call them more extroverted behaviors. So whatever information or whatever preconceived notion that they were given, those groups were given, they tend to sort of manipulate the information that they were given in order to agree with whatever preconceived notion they had. So the groups who were told that the woman cited was a librarian, was supposed to be hiring for a job as a librarian, okay? They tend to sort of give out information. So they tend to sort of recall or remember information that agrees with that notion for the woman being a librarian, because they tend to think that they're an introvert. Okay, they tend to sort of recall certain aspects of that woman as being more introverted, because they have the preconceived notion of that woman being hired for a job as a librarian, and vice versa for a real estate agent. They thought that they tend to give out more information. They tend to remember more extroverted sort of features on the woman. Okay, as they were told that the woman was being hired as a real estate sales agent. Okay, so that's basically what confirmation bias is. Okay, it's the tendency to seek and find information coincides with your current beliefs. That's basically it for this video, guys. If you liked the video, if you learned anything, please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe. If you didn't like the video, give me your honest feedback in the comment section. I'll be sure to read it. Thank you guys for watching. See you guys in another video.